Well, thank you all for being flexible last Thursday. I think that went pretty well. Too bad. So, hopefully everybody agrees. So we are going to finish up chapter 1 today. I'm going to go, if I can see, slide. We're going to talk about the payroll accounting system. We finished up talking about the HR system. We're going to talk today about the payroll register, 2 important reports, payroll register and employee earnings record. Okay. All right. Check that this is recording. Yes. Okay. So, payroll system obviously is set up to produce payroll, right? Again, the payroll department works closely with human resources, but the payroll system is where checks are actually dispersed. A lot of record keeping requirements that go along with the payroll system for obvious reasons. There are a lot of regulations that guide payroll and the production of payroll, and those regulations require that certain records be kept. We're going to look at a couple of those records here today. In addition, it just makes life a lot easier if we know how much we've paid everybody year to date. We know what everybody's pay rate is, and we have access to all that information. So the 2 records, and I'll write them up here. So we'll look at them here too. So I think the payroll registers, what they talk about first. Oh, that doesn't work very well. Payroll register and the employee earnings record. Okay, so 2 words that I want that will help you to distinguish between these 2, because it's easy to get them confused. Here, the word payroll, here, the word employee. This first report encompasses all information for each payroll. So for each pay date that occurs. So all the employees that are paid during that pay date. That is the payroll register. Employee earnings record is specific to individual employees. Okay, so that is the record that is, and this is a cumulative report. So this one is we get an individual payroll register for each payroll. So per payroll, this is per employee, and this is cumulative. Okay. So this is going to give information, the employee earnings record is going to give information about how much each employee was paid, what their gross earnings were, what all of their deductions were for each individual pay period, but then it also is going to keep a cumulative record of all of that information. Okay, so let's take a look at what each of these look like. You can see that, right? Okay, so the payroll register. Again, you can see here, it's a list of all different employees. They've truncated this between lines 5 and lines 47. I know that's tiny. Sorry. I don't know if I can make that any bigger. Display settings. No. No. Okay, I probably can, but I'm not going to mess around with it. So each line has information about individual employees, but we have in total information about all the employees that were paid during this pay period. Go back. quick. All right. Lots of columns here. All of this is then used, and it looks a lot like an Excel spreadsheet. This can be done on Excel. For the most part, software is what's going to generate this. So QuickBooks has a payroll function. There are lots of different payroll softwares out there. Larger corporations will actually put their own, will hire a software company to build their own software so that it's specific to that company and it automatically integrates into their accounting system. But this can also be done on Excel. Now, obviously, if it's done on Excel, there's a much greater chance of some human error occurring. But if it's set up properly, then it'll work. So each of these columns, what we have in the first column here, employee number, if that is relevant. Not every company assigns numbers to employees. Obviously, if it's a small company, that's probably not necessary. Employee name, second column, total hours worked during that pay period. So you can see this is, and it says for the week ending, okay? So this particular company is on a weekly pay cycle. If it was every 2 weeks, it would be for the 2 weeks ending, right? But this is for the week ending, total hours worked. So we've got Carl Springs here who worked 40 hours during the week that ended January 19th. Now that's not to say that their pay day is January 19th. It means that's the end of their pay cycle, right, on that particular day. Sue Cadova worked 42 hours during that pay period. I'm going to use those two as example. I'm actually going to talk about Cheryl Croson as well. So in Carl's case, he did not work any overtime. So, and you can see we have separate columns for regular earnings and columns for overtime earnings. So had Carl worked overtime, we would have some entries in these overtime earnings columns. He didn't work any overtime because he was at 40 hours during that week. His pay rate, $10.75. Multiply the 1075 times the number of hours worked, we get to the amount of his regular earnings. As opposed to Sue here, Sue did work 2 hours of overtime. She had a total of 42 hours. We've got her regular earnings, which we're only going to calculate based on the first 40 hours that she worked at her regular pay rate of $10.50 per hour. Again, that's multiplied out to arrive at $420. Now that's not all that Sue is receiving because she did work 2 hours of overtime. So we've got entries in the overtime earnings columns as well. She worked 2 hours. Her rate is the $10.50 times 1.5. So that is her overtime rate. So for those 2 extra hours, but only for those 2 extra hours, she's getting paid a premium for that work. So 2 times 15.75 is 31.50. So she was paid 31.50 for those overtime hours. Now we're going to skip down. You can see John worked under 40 hours, so he doesn't get any overtime. I'll try not to touch it because it's causing problems. John didn't work any overtime. But he worked actually less than 40 hours. So his hourly rate of $11.10 per hour would be multiplied by the 38 hours, nothing in the overtime columns. Marie did work 4 hours of overtime, so you're going to see information in those overtime columns. Cheryl worked 40 hours, but you can see here, she doesn't have a rate. There's an S. Salary, right. She is going to get a flat salary for every pay period. So she has $990.38 is her weekly salary rate. So regardless of what would be entered in this column for hours worked, it could say 50, could say 60, could say 10. She's going to get $990.38. We're not going to multiply it out by an hourly rate. But it also means you're never going to see any overtime earnings under Cheryl's name, right? Because she is salaried. Okay, so here we get our total gross payroll. So does everybody know the difference between gross and net? So gross, and we're going to use these terms a lot. Gross is the total before deductions. Okay, so remember that, gross salary. Net is after deductions, the total after deductions. So this would be the actual amount of the check, the amount that the employee receives, this amount. I'm going to call it a check. It could be a direct deposit. So you need to know the difference between the gross and the net. Here we've got total earnings, which is the same as gross. Put that down to total. Would be another way of putting it. You could say gross earnings. This amount is going to be the total of regular earnings plus the overtime earnings. So those two columns totaled together. So in the case of Carl, there's nothing in the overtime earnings, so all we have is the $430. In the case of Sue, we would add the $420 of regular earnings plus the $31.50 of overtime earnings for total earnings or gross earnings of $451.50. So again, this is before any deductions. Everything to the right of this is going to consist of deductions, and then we'll arrive at the net amount that is paid, okay? Again, Cheryl, we just have the $990.38 here. So after the total earnings, or the gross earnings, however you want to phrase it, but you'll hear that word gross earnings throughout the semester, so I want you to be able to understand what that means. Then we have taxes that are taken out. Now, the deductions, in this case, all we have are taxes. So there aren't any payments for benefits like health insurance or retirement plans or other types of benefits that employees may be signed up for. In this particular example, we don't have anything like that, right? We have deductions OASDI, otherwise known as Social Security, is the first one. HI, otherwise known as Medicare, the HI stands for health insurance. Now, I have to tell you quite honestly, until I started using this textbook, I had never heard it referred to as HI before. It was always just Medicare. And so oftentimes you'll see, here, let me write that. Guys, can you see? Because I know I'm monitored. So OASDI is the same as Social Security. HI is Medicare. I will often abbreviate Medicare, though, as MC. Just makes more sense to me. But HI, you can use that too, yeah.
Do you have to remember that it's Medicare, or can you just remember that it's health insurance?
Well, I think it's better to remember it as Medicare, because health insurance would be might be a separate deduction, right? If the employer offered health insurance and the employee pays for some portion of that health insurance, then we would also have a health insurance deduction here. So I think, to me, it makes more sense to remember it as Medicare rather than as health insurance, because otherwise we might have two health insurance going on. But your book refers to it as health insurance. I will oftentimes, though, refer to it as Medicare. Okay. So second column is our HI, or Medicare tax. Again, we're going to learn how to calculate these amounts. We learned that in chapter 3, how to calculate those. Third column, federal income tax. So the amount that is being deducted from the employee's paycheck. And again, that has been calculated. Chapter 4 is where we're going to learn how to calculate the federal income, the amount of federal income tax that needs to be withheld. And then state income tax is the fourth column here. Now, obviously, state income tax is going to vary from state to state. When we get to that point, we will look at how Iowa calculates withholding. There are certain states, as we had mentioned, where there is not any state income tax. So you might not have a column for state income tax in those states. Okay. So we've got all of our deductions here. Our last column, so we've got a column here for the check number, which makes sense. You'd be able to track it. Usually that would be included in the software. So you'd have a reference for the particular check that was issued, or it might be a direct deposit number, something along those lines. The final column, the net paid, this is the amount of check that the employee is going to receive. So this is calculated by taking our total earnings minus all of these deductions. Okay, so we subtract all of those to arrive at what our net paycheck is. So again, this is done for every pay period. Even if you have a special pay period that's out of the regular cycle. So, when that might occur is, if there was maybe some mistake, oh, Carl, gosh, we missed the 2 hours of overtime that he actually did work. Carl comes back on Monday and says, hey, I was shorted on my paycheck. Okay, we're going to run a special pay check for Carl so that we make sure he gets the 2 hours of overtime. Even then, even though it's outside of the normal schedule, we would have a payroll register for that particular payroll as well. So anytime an employee is paid or employees are paid, a payroll register is going to be run. Okay? Questions about this? No? Yeah.
So can he wait for the 2 hours of overtime for the next pay period?
It's best to give it to them because it was due to him. I mean, if they paid on Friday, it was due to him on Friday, right? So it's best to run a special payroll for him and get it to him as soon as possible. That would be best practice. I don't know, and again, state by state, there may be different requirements. I'm not aware of a requirement in the state of Iowa that they have to be paid that immediately, but he was due that on that pay period, right? So it's best to get that to him as soon as possible.
So they're going to redo all the deductions again?
But only for Carl. We would run a payroll register. We'd run a full paycheck. Oops. Again. We would run a payroll, but it would only have Carl on it, right? So his would be the only name that's listed there on that special payroll. Okay. Good question. Though. Yeah.
Now, for me, only time we have 4 deduction. No 5, no 6, only 4 for all companies.
Well, no. This is going to be, so this is, like I said, this is a simplified example. If we were in a state that had local income taxes or, a city that had some local city taxes, then we would have a column for each of those. So each deduction is going to have a column. If our employer offered retirement plan where the employee contributes a portion of that toward that retirement plan, we would have a column for that deduction as well. Now, oftentimes it will be separate. Those types of voluntary deductions would be separate from these tax deductions. Like maybe you might have, and there are no hard and fast rules about how this has to be set up, but you do have to have it. You do have to have one of these. So you could have several columns here before calculating the net payment for other types of deductions. Or you could have a net paid before voluntary deductions and then have some voluntary deductions listed out afterwards and then have the final amount of the net payment to the employee, right? So it could be done in either of those ways, right? Whatever makes the most sense. Other questions?
I have one question.
Yeah.
You know how we talked about health insurance, HR? Let's say in a company, I decided to get a health insurance through the company.
Mm-hmm.
And you know how we are automatically paying those 4 different columns, like
Mhm.
4 taxes?
Mhm.
So will there be a 5th one and what that will be?
Yeah.
Will that be HI or Medicare?
So
or-
that one would be probably voluntary health insurance and this is where that, not calling this HI makes a little bit more sense because you could have a separate column. If you called it MC tax, Medicare tax, then you could have a separate column for HI, for private health insurance, right? Or it could, if it was Wellmark or Blue Cross Blue Shield or something like that, the column might be titled that. The titles are specific to the payroll department and how they want, what makes sense to them, right? But yeah, there would be then another column for that deduction. Other garnishments, like if there's child support being taken out of somebody's paycheck, that would have its own column as well to show how much has been taken out. Then you see at the bottom here, we've got totals for that entire payroll. So during this week ending January 19th, all employees were paid a gross amount of $9,895.75. So that's the gross, the total amount of payroll for that pay period. We also have that, or actually, I shouldn't say that. It was $10,812.95 because this is the total of regular earnings. Ooh. This was the total of regular earnings, and then this is the total of overtime earnings. Now you can see, like I said, they truncated this, so we've obviously got more employees here, because if you went and did the math, these 5 don't total to $98.95. So you can imagine other employees that are listed in there. But so the total regular earnings, total overtime earnings, and then those 2 columns are added together to arrive at the total of all earnings, right? And then we also have total of all of our deductions that occurred, and then this is the amount of the paychecks that we issued. So on payday, the cash that went out the door for the company is $7,435.76. Now, we obviously, as a company, we owe more than that because we've withheld some taxes that ultimately we're going to have to pay, right? So, and we're going to get into when we pay those taxes and how we pay those taxes, okay? And in the final chapter that we cover, we're going to talk about how all of this information then fits into the accounting system. Because we're going to have to, every payroll, we're going to have to make, well, the accounting department's going to have to make a journal entry. That information has to be recorded in the payroll, the accounting system. But that's the last chapter that we're going to cover. Okay? Other questions about the payroll register? Yeah.
Yeah, I have a question for overtime.
Mm-hmm.
So for the rate, it's not changed. If you make 20 hours for overtime, it's not changed. You can say the same thing.
Right. Exactly. So that 1.5 times the regular rate, yes, that will stay consistent. So if this were, you're right. So if Sue had worked 62 hours, 22 hours of that would be overtime. Her overtime rate for all of those 22 hours is going to be $15.75 per hour for those 22 hours. Right? Yep. Yeah. And that's the minimum requirement. So the company, there's nothing stopping the company from saying, hey, if you work 20 hours of overtime, it's going to be 1.5 times your regular rate. If you work more than that, we're going to pay you 2 times your regular rate. The company can do that. This is the minimum requirement. Most companies aren't going to offer that additional, but it would be an added benefit that if they chose to do that. They could also say, you know what, for overtime, we're going to pay twice your regular rate rather than 1.5 times. They can do that. As long as at a minimum, they're paying 1.5 times the regular rate. So they can go over and above, but they can't go under. Okay. Yeah.
The law not start for hours for overtime, so you can make hours you want.
There's no limit to the amount. Well, you're only limited to the number of hours that there are in a week, which I think there are 168 hours in a week. Is that right? 24 times 7. So your employer can have you work all of those hours. There's no, it sounds ridiculous, but there's no maximum number of hours to work in a week. And employers can mandate overtime. They can say, you have to work this or you're fired. But when you do work it, they have to pay you adequately for it. Okay. And a lot of employees like the overtime. They're making more in that time, right? Other questions? Okay. So that is the payroll register. Like I said, it's done on a per payroll basis, and it summarizes all of the information for everybody that's been paid during that pay period. So now let's look at the employee earnings record. This is specific to each employee, and it's going to have some more specific information about each employee as well. So in this case, they've listed what department the employee works in, what their occupation is, where they're employed. Now, the state employed, obviously, if it's only one state, you probably don't have to list that, but maybe they have operations in multiple states, right? So this is in West Virginia, their social security number, which may be masked as well. Oftentimes now they're masked, like they'll cover up the first 5 digits and only have the last 4, so that in case anybody sees this, they're not going to have that social security number. Name. Over here, it says number of WH allowed. Nice abbreviations. That stands for withholding allowances, and this pertains to how the taxes are calculated, that the income taxes are withheld and how much is withheld. We'll become more familiar with that terminology as well, but I just wanted to point that out to you, that you look at that and probably, I have no idea what that means. So that's the number of withholding allowances. And they've got NA here, so that means they probably 0. And then the marital status. Marital status is important. That is going to help determine how much income tax, federal income tax is withheld, probably as well how much state income tax is withheld, depending upon the state and how they do things. In Iowa, that marital status would be necessary, okay? Which is kind of funny, because if you think about all of the questions that we're really not able to ask in interviews, you can't ask if somebody's married, you can't ask if they've got children, you can't ask that type of personal information, but ultimately once they're hired, we have that information. We know based upon, and we have to have that information to know how much to withhold from their paycheck. So this is Cheryl Croson's. So this is the individual, if you recall from the last slide, she is salaried. Now Cheryl's kind of weird. She's salaried, but she's entitled to overtime. When we get into the next chapter, you're gonna, next chapter, you'll see that there are certain instances where salaried individuals are actually entitled to overtime pay. It's kind of weird, because we always think of salaried as they don't get overtime, they're not entitled to that, but there are instances where they would be entitled to overtime pay, and it has to do with their job description, what their responsibilities are. Okay, so Cheryl is salaried, but obviously she is not exempt from overtime pay, because you'll see here, and again, this is all Cheryl. So we've had 3 weeks, we're on our 3rd pay. This was the week ending January 19th. If we can look back, we've got all of the weeks entered. So all of that information for each line here for the specific employee is duplicated onto the employee earnings record. Now, in this case, it's the 3rd pay that is duplicated. So we would see that all of this information pertaining to the 3rd pay is the same as what was listed for Cheryl on that payroll register, right? Exactly the same information. But we do have an additional column here for cumulative earnings. Remember I said it was cumulative.
Question.
Yeah.
So how they figured out the rate, the overtime rate, the salary?
We're going to get to that in the next chapter too. Yep. There are calculations that go along with figuring out what her rate is, right? She's salaried. Wait a minute. How do we know what 1.5 times her regular rate is? We're gonna go through those. Great question, by the way. I like to hear that you're anticipating. So the first week looks like exactly the same as the third week here. She didn't have any overtime during the first or the third week, but in that second week, she did get paid for some overtime hours. So the payroll register here for the previous week would have included some overtime earnings here for Cheryl. Now, if she is one of those employees who is salaried and not entitled to overtime, because we have employees that meet that criteria as well, then you would never see that overtime in that column. We wouldn't have anything listed here. So we've got, all of this was transferred over then from that payroll register for each pay period, but only for this one employee. Again, same calculations though. So we know the number of hours worked, the regular earnings, overtime earnings, and then there's our rate, and we would add together the regular earnings plus the overtime earnings for each of those payrolls. There is going to be, now they don't have it on here, there would ordinarily be a total down at the bottom as well, so that we know the total gross earnings, total Social Security taxes that were withheld, total Medicare taxes, all of that. Normally you would see that at the bottom. They haven't included that here because we're going to want to know that at the end of the year. All of this information gets transferred over to a year-end document that employees then use to prepare their tax returns. Okay, they're 1040s. It's called a W-2 form. And we'll get into that detail as well. So, like I said, ordinarily you'd want to have a total down there for each of these columns. They don't have it here. But what they do have is this column for cumulative earnings. So week one, obviously the cumulative earnings are only for week one, right? So the 990.38, and this is the cumulative net. Actually, no, they've got the cumulative gross earnings here. You might have a separate column for gross earnings and cumulative net earnings. You could do that as well. In the second week, though, what we've got is we've added together last week's gross and this week's gross, the 1,064, to get what's been paid in total for the year so far. And then week three, we're going to take this column, or this cell, and add to it the total earnings for that week. Okay, and that just keeps going. This is a weekly pay period, so they're going to have 52 weeks. Assuming Cheryl is employed there all year long, we're going to have 52 different rows for Cheryl. Right?
So it is like a consecutive, like 1 through 50 something.
Right. If they're
instead of like a monthly kind of.
Right. You'd have it for each individual pay period. Now, if we were on a bi-weekly pay cycle, there would be 26 rows because we have 26 pays. Okay, and we are going to get to that as well, that information. So keeping in mind the difference between these two, and like I said, the key words here is just kind of a memory device for you. Employee earnings record is only for the employee. Payroll register is for the entire payroll. Okay, quite more questions about the employee earnings record or the register?
I figured out the rate.
Did you? Good. Okay. Excellent. Yeah. So, yep, you have the annual salary, and then you would divide it by what her ordinary, and there are actually 3 different ways to calculate it. Yeah. So, yeah, the simplest way is to take what her annual salary is, divide it by
40.
Yeah, well, yeah, divide it by 40, and that gets her hourly rate. But there are a couple of different ways that it can be done as well. We're going to talk about those.
And this way, that what the employer will tell you if, like in advance, if you will be allowed to, would it be contracted or would it just like come out of nowhere?
It would, well, you should be informed. The employee should be informed that yes, you're entitled. This is your classification. You are salaried, but you are entitled to overtime for over 40 hours. Yeah. Yeah, all that stuff should be made clear at the beginning of employment. It's not always, but it should be. Yeah. Other questions? Again, the software is probably going to do this for you. If you're working with QuickBooks, these are reports that can be automatically generated in their list of reports.
So we don't have to memorize the columns?
Yeah. Yeah, well, for this class, you do. But,
Okay.
but when you're working in the real world, no, those are, and
Oh,
you'll know.
so we have to memorize like every,
Yeah, I want you to know how it, yeah, exactly. I want you to be able to know, okay, OASCI tax, that is Social Security tax, that's been withheld from the total earnings, that sort of thing. Yeah, and the types of deductions that you would see. Like I said, these are the minimum number of deductions that you would see. Although, again, if there is no state income tax, you wouldn't have a column for state income tax. But chances are you'd see some benefits as well that maybe the employees are entitled to, or garnishments, voluntary or involuntary types of deductions would also occur. Other questions? We're going to be working with these reports throughout the semester, and you'll have homework problems that include these records that you're gonna use. I think I don't know if you've done any yet in chapter 1. I can't remember specifically. I think there might be 1 or 2 that involve using these reports. So you'll become very familiar, even though it seems a little overwhelming right now. You're going to become very familiar with these reports. Okay. Other questions? Out there in virtual land, any questions? Let me see if I can't see them right now. Somebody else joined us. Who is it? Nope. Okay. Cool. All right, let's continue on then. We're almost done with these slides. Okay. So those are the reports, the records that we're going to be working with. A couple other things we want to talk about with regard to the payroll accounting system. So it is possible, and a lot of small to mid-sized companies do this. They will outsource their payroll. So have you guys heard of ADP or Paychex? These are big companies that all they do is prepare payroll for other companies. So they handle that function. They do all the calculations. They issue the checks. They send the reports off to the state and to the IRS. They issue the end of year reports that need to be done. They do all of that stuff. So the company hires them, and that is outsourced payroll. So you don't have a specific payroll department within the organization. Obviously, somebody has to be in charge, though, of handing off the correct information to that outsourced company. Now, how much did Cheryl make? Did she have any overtime? So all of that information still has to be compiled and then relayed to the company. They are responsible for making sure that paychecks are issued on time, that all of the reports to governmental agencies are done on time, all the deposits to the IRS and to the state are completed on time, but ultimately the company is responsible for everything, right? Even though you've hired this outsourced company, you also have to make sure if something happens, if it is late, the company is going to have to pay any penalties. The company has to answer for that. So you want to make sure companies need to make sure if they decide to outsource their payroll, that they outsource their payroll to a reputable company that is dependable in what they're doing, right? It has a history. It doesn't have to be a big company. The CPA firm that I worked for, we had a payroll department, and we processed payroll for, I think it was about 70 different small businesses. Some of them as small as 1 person in the business. Others, 50 people. But we had payroll clerks, a payroll manager and a payroll clerk that then processed all of that payroll for those companies. So we were an outsourcing company. We provided that. Oftentimes those small CPA firms or bookkeeping firms, a lot of bookkeeping firms will provide this service as well. They're less expensive than the bigger guys are. But you've got to make sure that they are reputable. They've been around and they've been doing it for a while, and that they'll take responsibility for any errors that occur. It is imperative. I would always tell clients when they would come in, I would get a lot of clients that would come in, and they wanted to start a business, whatever the business was that they were doing. They wanted to start a business, and they had plans to hire employees, or they themselves, as the owners of the business, were going to be considered employees in the business. And so they had to run payroll. And so I always told them, look, this is the most important function in your company. This is the one function that is above all else. It needs to be your number one priority. You have to know what you're doing as well. Some very bad things happen to companies who don't pay their payroll taxes. That money that they're withholding from employees, it doesn't belong to them. It's not their money. It belongs jointly to the IRS and to the employee. So they are entrusted with it. They're in kind of a fiduciary, it's a fiduciary role for them. So if they don't then remit it on time or in full or at all, some very bad things happen. And the owners of those companies can be personally liable for all of the payroll taxes and the penalties that occur. There are a lot of other things that happen in business where the owners of the business aren't personally liable, depending upon how the business is set up. But when it comes to payroll, the owner is always personally liable. And the IRS will go after the owner for those funds. So it's an extremely important function within any business. That's why it's very important to make sure that whoever is doing your payroll has the expertise. And, unfortunately, a lot of people who start businesses will think to themselves, well, I'm going to save some money here and I'm just going to do it myself. Not realizing the importance of it and how many deadlines they have to abide by that they cannot miss. And those deadlines are always coming up. And it becomes overwhelming for business owners who would rather be spending their time working on their actual business, what it is that they're in business for. Some suggestions that your book has to reduce the risk of unpaid payroll taxes: hire only bonded providers, meaning that those companies, if something occurs, they have funds to back up their work, so they can, if there are any lawsuits or anything, they're able to provide funds for those. The provider, the outsourcer, should not be the one signing any tax returns. That is the responsibility of the company. Okay. Correspondence, tax correspondence, needs to be sent to the business, the company, not only to the outsourcing payroll company, but also to the company who has hired them, so that the company is aware of any late payments or underpayments or anything like that. And regularly request IRS transcripts of the company account. That's to double check and to make sure that everything has been paid, that it's been paid correctly, and there aren't any surprises out there waiting for them. Questions?
So you can, like for the company, you can ask the IRS to send a transcript to the company itself?
Yes. Yep. You can request them online.
So just to make sure that the outsourcing payroll is doing the right
Yep.
thing.
Yep,
in time.
exactly, making sure that everything has been done properly. Now, obviously, whoever is requesting that needs to know how to read those transcripts and exactly what they say, right? Otherwise, it's just gobbledygook. Other questions about outsourcing? So this pertains to outsourcing if the company doesn't have an internal payroll department. Bigger companies have an internal payroll department. Like DMAC has their own payroll. They've got, I don't know how many people are in it, but they do everything internally. They don't hire that out to somebody else. But a lot of companies do hire it out. Okay. We're not going to do that. All right. I think we're good with this. Okay, so that concludes our lecture for the chapter. Any questions? Oh, and I see I need to move this. Sorry. Put that, no. Oh. There we go. That's a little bit better. Sorry, folks out there, I had blocked part of the screen on them. Let me kind of get that moved over so you guys can see the whole screen too. Zoom out a little bit. There we go. That better? Out there now you can see the whole screen. Okay, that's chapter 1. Done with chapter 1. All right. So, okay, good, Lisa. Sorry, I didn't realize that was covering up the board, the whiteboard. Okie doke. You guys have questions about the homework? Anything you want to look at together?
Think we can talk about the discussion post or no?
Yeah. Let's see.
So you want us to read from chapter 1 to 29?
No, it's on page on page
1-29.
1-29. Right. So let me pull up. Let me get out of here. And go over into Blackboard. Of course, now I've got to maneuver this. What to expect with the chapter 1 test? Well, it's an assessment. Don't call it a test. It's an assessment. Has anybody taken it yet? It's okay. So just a tip, by the way, for everybody, don't start it unless you can finish it. You've got 2 hours to take it, which should be plenty of time to take it. But don't peek at it and then think you're going to go back to it. Don't start it and then, oh my gosh, 15 minutes in, I got to go pick up my kids from school. I got to go, do something. Make sure you've got 2 hours because the timer keeps running. Okay. You do not have page 1-29. Okay, 1-28. Maybe the online one is a little bit different. Let's take a look. But yeah, so it's multiple choice, and maybe some true false. It's been a while since I put it together. So remembering is difficult. Let's see. Get in. All right, let's first look at the book that doesn't seem to have a page 1-29. Sometimes these books, the online books are a little bit different with the formatting than the paper books, and I use that paper book to put stuff together. So I may have referenced, oh, stop. No. All right. So chapter 1.
I think 114F.
114F. Oh, okay. So this is the one. I'm sorry. I'll change that in the description there. So it's the paychecks kept coming case problem that I want you to work on. Yeah. So Ken, salaried employee, was terminated from his company in April. Business had been slow since the beginning of the year. Each of the operating plants had laid off workers. Ken's dismissal was processed through the Human Resources Department, but the information was not relayed to the payroll office. So somehow those two departments weren't communicating with each other. If payroll doesn't know somebody's been terminated And if Ken is a salaried employee, then his paycheck's probably gonna keep getting processed, right? Obviously, we've got some problems with internal controls in this company. There need to be some checks and balances put in place because the payroll department should have that information. Also, a paycheck shouldn't be issued unless somebody within that department has verified that they are getting a paycheck, right? That they should be getting a paycheck. So somehow that didn't happen. As had been the policy, checks for workers at remote sites were mailed to the employees. That's kind of funny, they're remote, but they're not getting direct deposit. It's weird. The mailing of Ken's checks continued for the next 4 weekly paydays. Woohoo! Ken's like, yeah. It wasn't until the monthly payroll reports were sent to Ken's supervisor that the error was detected. And news for you, Ken's supervisor should be checking all of that before paychecks are even issued. Right? The supervisor needs to be in the loop before a paycheck is even issued to verify, yep, this is correct. That employee needs to be paid. Ken refused to return the extra checks. What action should the company take? So, what do you think the company should do? That's the discussion post. And I want you to participate. Read what other students have read or have written as well and contribute to that. There's no, I mean, I suppose there are some wrong answers, but there are no, specific right answers that I'm looking for. I want you to think about the case and think about everything that transpired and what types of things that the company might do. And I'm not talking just like legal. You're not attorneys. I don't expect you to know what the legal options are for that the company could take. But mostly what I'm looking for is what should they do in the future to prevent this from happening again? What kinds of procedures and policies could they put in place? Make sense? Sorry, I got the wrong page number up there. Yeah, this is one. Maybe the page numbers even really listed. These are more like sections than page numbers. Yeah, in the paper book, I think it's on page 1. Well, maybe it's on 128. Somebody out there get the paper book? Who is it that just said they? Lisa. So Lisa, did you get a copy of the paper book?
I did. I'm a paper girl.
Okay, so you were able to get it and they mailed it to you in a timely fashion, it sounds like?
No, actually, I went to the used bookstore across the street from the Ankeny campus. And
Okay.
surprisingly, they had one. It was still wrapped up in paper, so it was brand new. They took off the code, so it took off $11 for the code, but it was still cheaper. It was like 170 maybe.
Okay. All right. So it was, and it's a 2023
Yes, 2023
edition. Yeah, excellent. I'm glad that worked out. So yeah, the page number, and I might have, I don't know what I did.
But on I-28, I do have a case there, but the case problem is okay, yes, it's where you have, it looks like you have 1-142 for your case number. I can't really see because it's kind of blurry.
Sorry, it's 1-14.
Oh, 1-14. Okay.
Yeah.
Mine is like a case number LO.3, but it is about 10 getting fired and still got 4 checks. So.
Okay. All right. So this is the one that's entitled Paychecks Kept Coming on there.
Yes. Mine is numbered different, but it does have the same title.
Strange. Okay. Other questions? No? How about out there? Any questions on the homework? Don't ask them tonight at 10 o'clock, please. You probably won't get a response. It is due tonight, though.
Is there anything you want us to go through before taking the assessment that will help us?
The assessments in general are, I don't want to say easier. They're easier than the homework. You can use your notes on them. You can use your book on them. That's not a problem. Yeah, go ahead.
If we have notes on our computers,
Mhm.
are we able to switch back and forth
Mhm.
between those tabs?
Yes, so this is not like a respondus, like requiring respondus or anything like that. This is open note, open book. Like I said, don't really call it a test. It's just kind of a chapter. So that you know the basics of each chapter. Okay. We will have tests. We got 2 tests.
But it's not through the proctoring program, because it would not let you go into any other page.
It wouldn't?
No. When you're doing proctoring.
Oh, proctoring. Oh, no, it's not like that.
Okay.
No, it's just like doing the homework.
Okay.
Yeah, this is. And I haven't used
But you
proctoring.
just cannot check, that's all.
You just, right, like you don't, like the homework where you can, yeah. But you do have, like I said, you've got access to your materials. Yep.
Yeah, we have to go back and forth for the book, so.
Mhm. Yeah, yes. Indeed.
Indeed.
Other questions?
I can sign on to the internet connection.
You can't sign on to the DMAC internet?
Yeah, and like, it's like the password. Is it DMAP public?
Yeah. There shouldn't be a password.
Okay.
We can do a little preview of chapter 2. Let's do that. Okay, for some reason it logged me out. Maybe not. Oh, go. I forget I have 2 screens going here. Okay, so let's just do a little preview of chapter 2. So chapter 2, the assignments are not going to be due until the 14th, Valentine's Day. So you've got a couple of weeks. You get a little extra time here. And that is because, like I said right at the beginning, I'm going to be gone for 2 of the days. So this gives you a little bit more time to get that done. We're not going to miss anything. Everything is scheduled so that there's no lecture time that's going to be missed or anything like that. But you do have until the 14th to get the assignments done. The assessment, not until the 21st of March. But notice, well, I guess that's 2 weeks. So 2 weeks after that, chapter 3 is due, and then the assessment a week after that. I've got the wrong date listed here. What am I doing here? It says 2022. I didn't change it. Maybe I forgot to change the 22. And that should not be the 18th. Okay, don't look at that. Oh, that's because that's hidden from you guys. You can't even see that. That's why. Let's see here. Let's look at the student view. We'll see what you guys can see. There we go. All right, so chapter 2, it's a little bit bigger so that we can all see it, including me. Okay, so same types of assignments that you're going to have. We're gonna look at different ways of computing wages and salaries. So Rohan, the question that you had about well, she's salaried and has overtime. How do we know how much to pay her? Yes, I mean, you figured out one of the ways. There are some other ways to pay people as well who are salaried but are entitled to overtime. So we're also going to delve more deeply into the Fair Labor Standards Act. So we kind of skimmed that a little bit. We're going to talk a lot more about it in chapter 2. we're gonna define hours worked. Seems like it should be a pretty easy thing to define, right? But what about special cases where, okay, do you get paid for, you're in a job that requires you to change into protective clothing, but you haven't actually started work yet. Do you get paid for that time that you spend getting ready? You know, it depends. We have to define then what exactly hours worked are. What about if you're on call? Do you get paid for that? Like if you're in the medical field, you're on call. What about it? What if you're in a profession that requires you to sleep, some sleeping time? Doctors, nurses who are on call or on duty for over 24 hours, they gotta get some sleep, right? Pilots on long flights, they get sleep. So is that hours worked or is it not? So there are some special cases that we're going to talk about that where we need to define what hours worked are. In most cases it's pretty clear cut, but there are some special circumstances. The types of records used to collect payroll data. We're going to talk about, timesheets and time cards and badges, things of that nature, different ways that. Yeah, actually, we talked about that a few minutes ago, Tina. I don't know if you have a specific question about it or not, but we'll come back to it after we look at chapter 2 here. Then we're going to do some actual calculations. How do we calculate those regular hours and overtime pay? Again, for the most part, it's pretty simple, but there are actually a couple different ways of doing it. And so we're going to look at what those ways are of doing that. And then some different types of compensation plans. So you not only do some employees get paid by the hour or get paid a salary, some of them get paid by units of production. So if you're in manufacturing and you get paid maybe $1 per unit of production, well, chances are you are still entitled to overtime pay for hours over 40 hours in the week. So how do we calculate that? How do you determine what their hourly rate is when you're actually getting paid per unit that you produce? Again, there are several ways to do that. So we're gonna look at those different ways of calculating. So like I said, a lot of it seems pretty clear cut, but there are some special circumstances that do come up that we need to discuss. So that's chapter 2, which we are going to start talking about on Thursday. Okay, so you need to finish up your homework tonight for chapter 1, and that gives you at least tomorrow to maybe start looking at chapter 2 before we get into the discussion. Let's look real quick. Any questions about those topics? Okay, let's look real quick as well at the schedule. Okay, so where are we? So today is the 24th. So the assessment isn't due until next week for chapter 1 on the 31st. So you have an extra week to do that. Is it Thursday? We're going to start on chapter 2. We have 4 class periods to do that. But in the middle of that is the week that I'm not going to be here. So that's why you've got extra time to get the chapter 2 stuff done. All right, so that's. Any other questions? Hey, Tina had a question about that discussion board. Tina, did you have a specific question about it, or? And feel free to turn on your microphone. I can hear everybody now.
I'm sorry, I must have been writing something down when you were discussing that. Are you talking about the chapter 1 case study?
So yeah, the chapter 1 case study. So if you, it's the one that is entitled Paychecks Kept Coming, and it has to do with Ken, an employee who was laid off but continued to get paychecks. So
Oh,
his,
okay.
so if we were talking about the fact that certain issues of the, I think it's called case number 1-14F, or it's listed under that in the ebook, if that makes sense.
Okay.
I have it down
Yes.
as page 1-29 because the copy of the book that I have has it on that page. But apparently, there are other copies that don't have it on that page, that have it on 28 of the paper copy, and then in the ebook, it's listed on a different page as well. But that's the one I want you to
Okay.
discuss. Does that help?
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Other questions?
When is the case study?
It's for the discussion board. So there's a discussion board. Oh, when is it due?
Yeah.
So you say, oh yeah, today. It's due tonight.
Okay.
I'm sorry. So, yeah. No, it's too big for me to see. And remember, there's a extra credit in there as well. That's not the one. All right. What's going on? Yeah, so this one.
High school.
The extra credit is inside the assignments.
Extra credit is inside the assignment. That as well isn't due though until next week. So I want you to focus on getting that homework done first. Once you get it done, go ahead and you can work on that. But the discussion board posting is due tonight. Yeah.
To do the, I'm not familiar with the discussing board yet.
Okay. So I'll show you how to do that. So what you'll do, let me go into, or let's go to student view. Okay, so all you should have to do is click there, and I can see Ben's already contributed. Overachiever. So you can, I think you just create a thread up here, right?
Yep.
Just go up there, and it will then say up here what I want you to do. And again, don't look at that page number. You can create your own thread.
First, we have to make ours, and then only we can see others.
It's
right?
probably best to do that, because otherwise you're like, you might have a tendency to just copy what somebody else, and I don't mean intentionally copy, but you know.
You can't see the others until you post.
Oh, it does, is it set up that, okay,
Correct, yeah.
okay, well, there you go. I didn't know I had it set up that way. So there you go. And then once you've done that, you can see the others and go and comment. That help? Okay. So yeah, just click on that and then create thread. All right. And I think you can subscribe to, which would give you, make you aware of when other people have contributed. Okay. Other questions? Yeah.
It's more like a personal thing, but like when you're looking at the DMAC online, like all your classes sort of thing,
Mhm.
and you click on the calendar, you can kind of like see when stuff is due.
You are right.
That isn't like, it doesn't show when any of this stuff is due for this class.
It doesn't?
Not for me. I have two of my other classes, but none of your stuff.
Let's see. I can't see. Usually it will tell you. so the discussion board one is up there, but looks like it's, don't know why that would be. Okay, I'll look into that. Okay, I don't know why that would be. I don't know if that's a Cengage thing or not. Do you have, are the other classes, do you have Cengage?
Yeah, I think one other class I have engaged.
Okay, and you're able to see that class on there?
Yeah.
Yeah, this is the only class that you can't see that?
Yeah.
Okay, I'll look into that. I don't know why that is.
Cause like for the 24th, I don't have anything that says.
Nothing's listed, Except it should have the discussion board.
Nope, that's not even there.
Your discussion board isn't there,
Nope. It shows the 24th is just blank.
because I have the discussion board that shows up there. Yeah, Tina.
So I was just looking at the assignments on Cengage and then the assignments on Blackboard.
Mhm.
So they kind of don't match up a little bit. So like if I go to Cengage and it has, you know, like my grades and it has everything that's on there, even what's not graded yet. But it says chapter 1 extra credit videos due 1/31/23, and then it says upcoming chapter 1 adaptive study extra credit, the need for payroll and personnel records, and that says upcoming and then no grade as well. But then if I go to Cengage, it looks like I have everything done on there except for the assessment. So I just want to make sure I'm not missing anything.
Let me, what I can do is, whoops. Go into Cengage. Oh, I guess I'm already in Cengage over here.
Assignments.
Let me try and sync it. No, I don't want to do that. Okay, come on, I gotta go into the grade book in order to do this. Oh. Let me synchronize and see if that helps. Change anything. Get back to the main menu now. Anybody else encounter this? This happens to me. Okay, so Tina, you said.
So when I went to the DMAC Blackboard, went to my courses and then went to my grades,
Okay.
I saw the things that I had already completed, and then I noticed that there was the chapter 1 adaptive study guide extra credit videos, chapter 1 case study paychecks keep coming or kept coming, and then I go into Cengage under assignments, and those aren't listed under Cengage.
Okay, so the discussion boards won't be listed under Cengage because they're only in Blackboard.
Okay.
And then you said the videos.
Yeah, the extra credit, the need for payroll and personnel records, and then extra credit videos. Looks like they're both due 1/31 of 23.
Right. So those, and there are the extra credit ones I may have to transfer over manually. I've had issues with that before, with them not transferring over. Are they showing up in Cengage, but they're just not showing up in Blackboard?
I'm seeing them in Blackboard. I'm not seeing them in Cengage, and I can't click on them in Blackboard.
Okay. To actually get to them, is that what you're saying?
Right, I can't even access them.
Okay. Has anybody else had any issues with that? Have you tried yet?
Yeah, I have the same problem.
You have the same problem? Okay, I'm not sure why. So this is the adaptive study. You're not even able to get to that point? Are you able to get to this point?
Well, I have.
Or is it just the videos?
Well, I did the.
So that's, no, I can't even click on that in Blackboard. That's not the adaptive videos, unless, are they the same ones? The chapter 1, all it says in Cengage is chapter 1 extra credit videos due 1/3 of 23. Is it the same one as the chapter 1 adaptive study guide extra?
No, well, there are 2 extra credits. If you can go, I don't know why you're not able to get there through. Are you guys able to get anybody else? So Daniel, you're not able to get there?
Well, I already did the assignment.
Okay.
It says 100%.
Okay.
But in Blackboard, it says upcoming.
Upcoming. Okay. So I probably am going to have to transfer those manually, those scores, which will be done by midterm and at the final, because if I'm continually doing it, I don't know which ones, then I lose track of which ones I've transferred and which ones I haven't. But if it's in Cengage, if you see a score in Cengage, you're good. That will get transferred over. Okay, and it'll get transferred over by the midterm and by the final. Okay. And you
haven't graded any discussion posts, right?
No, because it's not due yet. Yeah, I don't. I wait until after the due date to look at the introductions ones are.
Yeah, I haven't even seen on the first one. So
okay, I have to do that. I'm sorry. Thank you for reminding me. I thought there was one that I forgot. So, but yeah, for this one, this week. Any other questions? So Tina, I don't know. Did that answer any of your questions?
So I just want to make sure I'm not missing anything. I guess that's my main thing, is that chapter 1 adaptive study guide extra credit, the need for payroll and personnel records, in the extra credit videos. I just want to make sure that I did those, so I don't miss out on that, because I can't. All I see are 3. I see the chapter 1 assignments due, chapter 1 assessment, chapter 1 extra credit videos in Cengage, and that's all I see. So I just want to make sure that I'm not missing anything.
Okay. Hold on here. Okay, so from my perspective, I see that you did the adaptive study and there is a score, and I see that you did the videos and there is a score in Cengage.
Okay.
But you're not seeing that from your end.
I'm seeing it on Cengage. I'm just not seeing it on the Blackboard part of it.
Okay. Yeah, so that I'm gonna have to transfer. I don't know why, for some reason, the extra credit stuff, when I set it up in Cengage, Blackboard doesn't like to recognize the points. Like it doesn't, I don't, it's a technical issue between the two systems not talking to each other. So that will get transferred over. As long as you see it in Cengage, it will get transferred over. Okay?
Okay. I just want to make sure I'm not missing anything. So that
Yep,
answers my question. Thank
absolutely.
you.
Yep, I understand. Yep.
So if you don't switch that over until midterm, could we do any of those extra
Yeah.
credit stuff up until the midterm?
Well, they do have due dates.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. So, yeah, it's just that I won't transfer it. Like I said, otherwise it's, okay, so I transferred Rohan's. Who else didn't I transfer? You know, best if I just do it all at once. Other questions? Yeah.
So I missed the Tuesday, class for the discussion board.
Mm-hmm.
Can I still do it?
Yeah, go ahead and contribute to that. Yeah. I think if you have any issues getting in there, because I know you signed up late for the class, so. Other questions? All right. Well, we will finish for today. I guess we're done anyway, aren't we? So, let me see here. If you guys have any questions, again, shoot me an email. Otherwise, yeah.
I'm trying to join the tutoring
Uh-huh.
through Blackboard, and you know how it says an instructor like taxes.
Mhm.
I don't even know what tax is.
So it's
You
been
think
like,
this will help?
No, well, they can't help you do that. Like, they can't help you with your own taxes. That's if you were.
What I'm trying to know is like, will they give you like information about how to, work on it?
No, it's mostly if you're signed up for the tax class, then they can help you with the assignments for the tax class. Yeah, exactly. Because oftentimes we'll have instructors that don't know, they can't help students that are in my payroll class or in my income tax class, but we actually do.
Instead of
Yeah.
paying someone else, it just
Yeah.
like TurboTax.
You can, yeah, and you can, so if you want, if it's an issue of not wanting to pay for it, you can go over to VITA at United Way starting the last week of January and get free.
That's not the issue, but the thing is, I want to learn.
You want to learn, yeah,
So
sure.
that way
Well,
next
then,
year I can do other things.
then take my tax class and then next year sign up for my VITA class. And then you will.
Okay.
But I know this year you want to. I don't, yeah, there's not much I can offer you.
We have.
Yeah.
I mean, I have a friend who does food TurboTax, and he has like a family of 6, and then, you know,
Yep.
his mom, he's divorced, he gets child support, all that, and he does it like in a simple way, you know, with TurboTax, and what he pays $50 for the application. I'm just like, why pay other people?
Yep, absolutely.
Because I'm trying to get in the field.
Okay, well,
That's
good.
why.
Okay, well, good. Well, I'll see you in income tax, then my income tax class.
Okay, if
And
I,
then, well, which is a requirement of the program,
okay,
the class, you have to take that.
okay.
Yeah, and then the VITA class as well is where you learn, and you learn different software and lots of different, yeah. But that happens in the spring, because obviously tax season. I'm gonna close this down so that